Hello, everybody. I'll give you a few minutes to get signed in. You are at Ventana Wildlife Society's monthly Condor Zoom-Chat. Hopefully you can hear me just fine. Today is June 24, 2021. Our next Condor monthly chat will be on July 29th, also on the last Thursday of the month. As a reminder, please keep yourself muted. We do have a big group here today. We're going to leave a lot of room for question and answer at the end of today's Zoom, though. So we're going to have lots of opportunity to hear your questions through the chat, and we'll make plenty of time to answer those. Today's topic is lead poisoning and the ongoing threat it poses to condor recovery, and how hunters and ranchers can make a difference by switching to copper ammunition and other non-lead alternatives. This issue has been an ongoing problem for many, many years. For 25 years on the Central California coast, Ventana Wildlife Society has been releasing condors. And soon after those releases began, we started to detect lead poisoning. And it's been an ongoing threat to recovery ever since. And so today we're going to get into the weeds a little bit on this topic. And we're going to show you why the problem continues and what we're doing about it and what we can all do to overcome this problem and continue with condor recovery. By now, you probably have received an appeal letter from us in the regular mail or by email, and that's what we're basically asking help on, is how to continue resolving this problem of lead poisoning and to continue releasing more condors to the wild, because those are the two most important things that can be done, and those are the two top priorities of Ventana Wildlife Society. And so I just wanted to mention that appeal, and that's what essentially it's all about. And that we're already 130,000 toward our goal of 260 or 360,000. So we're off to a wonderful start, only about 200,000 to go. Today we have three staff with us in addition to myself. I didn't introduce myself for those who don't know me. I'm Kelly Sorenson, I'm the executive director. We also have Darren Gross, who is labeled Joe Burnett today because he's using Joe Burnett's Zoom channel. But welcome Darren Gross. He's going to be giving us a presentation on the field update here pretty soon. Joan Biddle is also with us today. She's helping coordinate the Zoom, and you've probably seen her name in many correspondences so far. And then Mike Stake is here today, who will lead our discussion on this lead poisoning problem at hand. So with that, I'll turn it over to Darren, and let's hear what's going on in the field.
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm glad to be here today, filling in for Joe. And yeah, I'll just jump right into our field update, just a quick update this week. Let me start sharing my screen. All right, and then I'll get this started. Yeah, so this will just be an update of sort of the happenings over the last month since Joe gave the last presentation at the end of May. And I've featured 538 here on the cover because this is one of our nesting females, and we were recently able to trap her. Actually, Pinnacles National Park, our partners trapped her, and we were able to get a new GPS unit on her. So we now know exactly where she's nesting and can keep a better track of that nest. So I thought I'd feature her a little bit today. All right, so just getting right into the update. So speaking of nesting, again, we have been trying to trap the untagged chicks from 2020. Again, there's one in Big Sur that we're still keeping an eye out for, 1030. But there were three from Pinnacles, two of which are now tagged, and we have confirmed those the identities of those birds that we recently tagged. So one of them, 1034, whose parents are 606 and 747, currently has a blue tag with the number 1 on it as the temporary ID tag, because that was the first untagged that was trapped. And the newest bird that I don't think was identified for the last update is 1021. So that was the second bird, or the second untagged chick from 2020 that has been trapped. And so that bird currently has a blue tag with a 2 on it. And that bird's parents were 564 and 317. There's still at least one untagged that we've seen the past month. It's mostly been seen sort of since the end of May up through June 11th. It hasn't been seen since, but we're still keeping our eye out. But we're pretty confident that bird is 1027. It could still be 1030, but it seems like that bird spends most of its time over at Pinnacles, where 1027 we suspect is from. All right, so moving into the status of the most recent releases from San Simeon. Again, it was we call them the San Simeon 9 for the 9 birds that we released last November and December. They're all doing pretty well. You can see here, this is sort of a map of their ranges since their releases. And this sort of yellow bubble, that's sort of right here that I'm trying to circle with my arrow. I hope you all can see that, but that's been their range for the past month. And what's interesting about this is that this is looking really similar to kind of a lot of the ranges we see for most of our birds now. They're kind of focused in between the release sites of San Simeon, Big Sur, and Pinnacles National Park. But they're also sort of exploring this area south of or southeast of Pinnacles National Park, like a lot of our other birds do. So it's not quite as exploratory as last month's update, where 974 went all the way down to Santa Barbara, but they've kind of honed in on the major areas that most of the flock seem to use most heavily. So a quick nesting update. We currently have 6 active pairs. I know that's a bit down from the last update, but you know, still those 5 chicks that Joe mentioned last time. It is chick 1078, 1077, 1089, 1095, and 1096. And there's a new chick now, like I said, since we were able to get a new GPS unit on 538, we've been able to sort of monitor that nest more carefully, and from her activity, it's clear that that nest is active and going strong. So that, and at this point, that chick is definitely hatched. So that is now chick 1104. So we're getting pretty late into the nesting season now, and the other nests that were active when Joe last presented, unfortunately, those have failed in the past month. So that was the trio in San Simeon, 566, 711, and 725, who unfortunately died recently. And then the Pinnacles, 2 Pinnacles nests, that of 692 and 726, that nest unfortunately failed. And then also the nest of 330 in Pinnacles female 626. So just a quick update on the population numbers. With 725's recent mortality, we're down to 85 birds in the Central California population. As I said, there are 6 active nests, all with chicks now. And yeah, for the total for this year for deaths, we're up to 9 with 725's recent mortality. But sort of the outlook for the rest of this year, we're still working on the rebuild for our Big Sur Condor Sanctuary. We've been going through all the testing and surveys we've needed to get clearance to remove debris and start building and getting things going there again. We'll have more releases in the fall from San Simeon, which will include Nico and Eva, both of whom are still doing great down at LA Zoo. And we're hoping that it'll be a large cohort that we can release close to 9 birds or even more from San Simeon again, but we'll get more information on that in the next couple months. You know, as I mentioned before, we have the 6 nests going, so we'll also get a boost from that wild production once those 6 chicks fledge. And there's always a chance that there's a pair out there that we've just have not been able to monitor closely and or even know about. So we'll see what happens. Maybe we'll end up having more than 6 chicks out there. And yeah, our non-lead outreach and ammunition giveaways, we're still keeping those going to help reduce lead in the landscape, which and Mike will talk a lot more about the non-lead outreach and ammunition giveaways coming up here in a bit. And just to sort of set the stage for that a little bit, and I know a lot of folks here have been asking about 725's recent mortality. So just to fill you guys in a little bit on that, she was found by Pinnacles National Park biologists earlier in June, on June 7th. At this time, we don't have a confirmed cause of death, and we won't until her necropsy is complete. which should be in the next few months. We should get results from that. However, we did observe behaviors and symptoms from her shortly before she was found that are consistent with lead poisoning and similar to things we have seen from birds who have had confirmed deaths due to lead poisoning. So just to touch on that, I mean, really, this is the major thing that we're working to overcome here at Ventana to restore the condor population to Central California. And these past few years have definitely been hard for lead poisoning in the condor population in Central California. So in 2019, you know, there were 9 total mortalities. 7 of those we confirmed were due to lead poisoning. Last year, 2020, we had 9 of the 24 total mortalities were due to lead poisoning. And last year too, we had the Dolan fire. 9 birds died from the Dolan fire. So if you remove those mortalities, that's 9 of 15 that were not due to fire, like not due to the fire, but were caused by lead poisoning, which is again over half that number. And then so far in 2021, we've had 9 total mortalities, and 7 of those will be confirmed to have been due to lead poisoning. So yeah, I mean, all the releases, the nest monitoring, the tracking we're doing through GPS and radio telemetry, and the non-lead outreach, which Mike is about to speak to, like that's really what we're working toward to fight, to overcome and get these birds going and have a self-sustaining population here in Central California. So yeah, I'll leave it there and stop sharing my screen, and I'll let Mike take over now.
Darren, before you stop sharing your screen, could we have another quick look at the nest slide where you show the nest updates? We have a request to see that again.
Sure, absolutely.
And hey guys, I forgot to give an update on this new fire, the Willow fire. So I'd like to do that briefly after you're done with this.
Was it this slide, Mike?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, and Darren, as far as you know, the failed nests, the recent ones, is that just a case where eggs did not hatch?
Yeah. So both of the I think for this last one here, 330 and 626, I don't know if they were ever able to get a visual of an egg, but just from the behaviors of the parent birds, especially 626, she was in a nesting pattern, you know, incubating, but she had stopped following that pattern and going to the area where they believed she was nesting. So they deduced a nest failure from that. For 692 and 726, that wasn't a nest they were able to see into and look at the egg on a regular basis, and that egg just did not hatch when it should have. So it was kind of similar to 477 and 190 situation where the egg was there, but it did not hatch, and the parents eventually stopped incubating. And then for the trio, again, I don't think it's there's any coincidence. I think 725's recent mortality and whatever she was going through could have been a cause or a reason for that nest failing down in San Simeon.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Darren. I'll throw it to Kelly to talk briefly about the fire. Kelly, there's also a question, how long will the one-to-one fundraising go on? Maybe you can touch on that. And while you're talking, Darren and I will transfer control of the screen sharing and move forward.
Sounds good. I actually just answered the question about the match in the chat, but our goal is to raise it by the end of the calendar year. I think we might have a little bit of flexibility, but that's our goal, is to try to raise it by the end of the calendar year. And thanks for asking. So this new fire, the Willow fire, was started about a week ago. I think we're on day 8 right now. It was started by lightning, and it was started in the kind of the deepest part of the Ventana wilderness. It's surrounded by areas that were burned last year, which is a good thing because there's not as much fuel for the fire to expand. Lately, we've had conditions that have been conducive to suppress the fire. In fact, today's report showed that the perimeter did not expand at all, that it's the same size as it was yesterday. And it's looking encouraging. The firefighters believe that it'll be contained by July 11th. We have had no condors injured by the fire that we know of, and there are no nests in the immediate vicinity of where the fire is burning. So I can happily report that the Willow fire is not a big concern to us. And just another note on fire in general, I wanted to stress that the Dolan fire last year was really extraordinary. Very unique in the sense that it burned in the middle of the night during a time, when condors are roosting. They don't typically fly at night. And there were just a lot of factors that went into play, making that, I believe, an anomalous situation. But, only time will tell. We are seeing wildfire more often these days. And it is a threat, there's no doubt. But I do think these condors are becoming more adept over time. And as long as they have some time to prepare and to get out of the area while it's still daylight, most of the time the birds do just fine. So anyway, that's all I wanted to mention on the latest wildfire. And if you're ready to go, Mike, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And to ease into the transition to this lead topic, I want to bring Darren in one more time with a question from Cora in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm proud of the fact that we have viewers from all over the country. On this chat, we have viewers from 20 different states and several countries. So thank you, everyone, wherever you are, for joining us today. But Cora wants to know, will the older birds like redwood queen be tested for lead? We've seen a lot of new tags on birds. The viewers are noticing that. And we've talked about catching the untagged birds, but what about the older birds? Are we not targeting them? Could you clarify sort of what our routine and what our hopes are for catching all of the birds?
Yeah, that's a great question. So how we sort of manage trapping here is we try to trap birds based on when their transmitters are going bad or when they're getting old. Or again, if a bird's untagged, like the chicks, we try to prioritize those birds too. And then if we notice a bird's unhealthy, we'll always try to trap that bird as well. Or if it's showing signs of sickness, anything like that. So yeah, a lot of the older birds right now, like 190, she was actually just trapped by Pinnacles National Park a couple of weeks ago and was handled and got a brand new vinyl tag, brand new transmitter. And they did draw blood to submit off to get tested for lead. And thankfully, her lead test did come back low. So she was all good to go. But every bird we trap, we'll take a blood sample of and send it off just to keep track of the lead levels in their blood and see how these birds are doing.
We appreciate the well wishes, the concern of the viewers over some of our recent mortalities. It's been a tough stretch, to be honest with you, in terms of losing birds. And sometimes it might seem we're very clinical about this. This is Joe Burnett filling out a report for a condor that died several years ago. And we have to be a little bit scientific about it because we want to learn as much as we can about each individual bird's death with the hopes of using that information to mitigate future risk. And so I'd like to talk to you about taking the next step in trying to reduce mortality, trying to curb this trend that we're seeing with lead. And there are different mechanisms of how birds can contract lead poisoning. We thought of this often as a hunting issue, but it could be a situation much like this, where condors are feeding on a rural ranch, feeding on ground squirrels. And these are carcasses not collected by the shooter. If there's lead being used, then it's a good bet that the condors could get pieces of that lead. And if one bird gets it, others might get it as well because they tend to feed in groups, as you've seen by watching the cameras. I want to stress here that ranchers and hunters are good for condors. the ranchers, they provide habitat that's not developed. They provide food sources, water sources. So we support hunting and ranching for the potential of what they can do for condor conservation. The problem comes when lead bullets are used. Condors are at risk of ingesting lead from spent ammunition and getting sick and dying. We've read the literature. We've seen the evidence that links lead poisoning in condors with lead from spent ammunition. We're convinced by it, but we're also very close to the situation. We handle these birds on a day-to-day basis, watching them. We're very close to them. And so we see with our own eyes how lead can affect these birds. We've recovered them when they've been sick. We've been there when they've taken their last breath. And so it hits us very hard. And the crew really feels it when a bird is lost to lead poisoning. And one of the things we've seen is just direct evidence like this picture shows. This is an X-ray of a condor, I believe it's 318 from a few years ago, that died of lead toxicosis. And in the X-ray, an object was seen in its digestive tract. And well, what is that? I can see the transmitter there, obviously on the right-hand side, but what is that little small rectangle right in the middle? Well, they were able to extract that object and they found it was a 22 caliber bullet, lead. And so this is a case where the bird ingested that bullet and possibly some smaller fragments and died as a result. And so we're in a position where we see firsthand the devastation of lead poisoning. And one of the problems with the lead is that it fragments very easily when it impacts the animal that is being shot. I'm showing a lead bullet on the left here and a non-lead copper bullet on the right. You can see the spent versions of those bullets on the inner part of the picture. And the lead bullet has a lot of fragments associated with it. So if someone wanted to convince me to make the switch, I wouldn't need to see anything else other than this. I wouldn't want to have this in my food. The copper bullets on impact, they stay relatively intact and there are fewer fragments. So even though a condor might be able to distinguish a big bullet from the meat, they're hard pressed to be able to distinguish a small fragment of a lead bullet, which could be the size of your fingernail clippings. Those are easily ingested and become quite a problem. So our role is to try to manage that threat, mitigate it, reduce the amount of lead exposure. And we do that in a couple of different ways. You've seen on the camera that we provide a clean supplemental food source. Just last night, Kara, one of the biologists, placed carcasses at the San Simeon site. And I believe the night before, Darren, Evan, or both of you did the same in Big Sur. And so that's a regular thing that we do to provide a known clean source of food. These are three of our staff, left to right: Mike Tyner, Kathy Hamilton, and David Moen are handling a bird. They're testing that bird for lead exposure, and we can get a result right there in the field. And then if needed, we can treat a bird for lead poisoning. And I might mention here that we have a lot of partners that help us out with that. For example, we don't actually treat the bird. Our treatment involves driving the bird to Los Angeles Zoo or the Oakland Zoo, where those facilities actually do the chelation treatments and help the birds. So we're very proud of our collaboration with the zoos. We're very proud of our collaboration with Pinnacles National Park, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then also in the non-lead ammunition outreach. That's a big part of my job now, but there's also staff at Pinnacles National Park and Institute for Wildlife Studies that have full-time staff devoted for non-lead ammunition outreach. I was looking at my numbers today, and I've met with 200 hunters and ranchers so far this year. So we are making contact with hunters and ranchers out there. We're devoting a lot of time to communicating with them. And one sure way to book an appointment with a hunter is to provide free ammunition. And so Ventana Wildlife Society has been doing that since 2012. To pay for all of this product, we have applied for grants and received grants that are specifically earmarked for purchasing non-lead ammunition. The members and donors who support us, that money's not going to the non-lead product. This is money that we're using through grants that we have received. Monterey County Fish and Game Commission, for example, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have provided funding towards non-lead purchasing. But since 2019, as Darren has mentioned, we've seen a spike, an increase in lead-associated mortality. And so this has become a problem. This is a trend that is not good. It's something that makes us just want to strap in and work even harder to try to mitigate this problem. But even with the free non-lead distribution program, we have new challenges. What I'm showing you here is not the toilet paper aisle at Kroger's. This happens to be a gun shop and the ammunition department, where we see a lot of empty shelves. Since COVID struck, there's been a huge demand in both firearms and ammunition. This is an unprecedented demand, and that has pretty much cleaned out the shelves, and it's put manufacturers backlogged for many months in terms of getting product out. So one of the problems that we face is that by Christmas 2020, this shelf here was completely empty. You would not be able to find ammunition anywhere in your local stores. Well, if you're like me, it's not a problem. What you do is you go online and you buy stuff there and have it shipped to you. How many of you purchased toilet paper that way last year in March? You can just get it online, anything you want. Well, except for ammunition. Hunters are not able to use the internet like they did before because the Safety for All Act legislation recently banned, or I should say restricted internet sales. It was restricted in the sense that a California hunter can no longer have ammunition shipped directly to their home. The transfer has to take place face-to-face, and it has to be handled by an ammunition vendor, a retailer. And so hunters are not able to find what they need online, so they have to go to the stores. Well, during the COVID shelter in place, there was no one going into stores. And then after the shelter in place, we saw a lot of social unrest during the summer of 2020. That increased the firearms demands even more. And that really exacerbated what we're seeing here today, and that is empty shelves. Now, in the last 6 months, I've seen a slight increase in product hitting the shelves, but unfortunately, the non-lead ammunition is lagging behind. So this picture here is what you might actually find today in a store. But unfortunately, most, if not all of what you see here is lead. And so a hunter going into a store, maybe wanting to completely follow the regulations, they're not able to buy non-lead ammunition. So you get a situation where you have the law that requires the use of non-lead ammunition for shooting wildlife. But the law does not require non-lead for target shooting, shooting in areas where wildlife supposedly would not be affected. So if target shooting is still compatible with lead, that's why lead is still sold in our California stores. That's why people can still buy lead. And there's an opportunity there for them to use the lead. I'd like to share an email from one of our hunters. It reads, "I'm under the understanding that I might be able to get lead-free ammo through you being Ventana Wildlife Society. If that is so, how do I go about getting some? With the lack of available ammunition in the state, I only have leaded ammo at this time, hoping I don't have to use it." Now, I've received about a dozen variations of this same letter. People are concerned about their availability of the non-lead ammunition. And this one had a little bit of a threat to it, like, if I don't get some non-lead ammunition soon, I'm going to have to use my lead. And so that is conceivably something that is happening right now, where the inability to get non-lead ammunition, particularly those smaller calibers like 22 and 17 HMR, the inability to find those in those stores is really creating a situation where we have a law, but the mechanism to follow that law is broken. The good news here is that this situation won't last forever. So if this is the reason why we're seeing a spike in condor mortality, or at least it's contributing to it, at least it's a situation that we can fix with time. We just need to be a little more efficient in how we go about with our non-lead ammunition distribution. And so as an ammunition vendor, did I mention that Ventana Wildlife Society became an ammunition vendor specifically to help hunters and ranchers through some of the availability issues, through some of the regulations that are complicating the purchasing procedures. As a vendor, we have a few advantages. We can have ammunition shipped directly to our business address. And so we have non-lead ammunition that a lot of the stores do not. And so it's just a matter of who do we give it to? There's a finite supply. Who gets priority? Is it the person that asks me nicely or says nice things about Ventana? Well, I'm sure that doesn't hurt, but we have to be a little bit more scientific about it to really increase our impact with condors. And so we might start with a fake map like this. We have real maps, trust us, we've got some great maps, but I'm going to show you this fake map here for illustration purposes. It has 13 properties on here. And as a first priority, you might think property J there might be a good target, pardon the pun, for distributing non-lead ammunition. That's a big property. And it looks like it's right in the center there. So maybe the landowner at J would have influence over her neighbors. And so let's start there for handing out non-lead ammunition. Well, that's great, but now we want to know more about what the birds are doing. And so that's where we get Darren Gross and Evan McReith, who have some GIS smarts. And they're back in front of the computer, plugging away at the GPS data. The GPS is recording where the birds go. And so we can actually find out where they're feeding. So I'll ask Evan to put some birds on the map, and here they are. I'm not sure why they look like toucans, but those are condors. We'll just trust me on that. You see that there are a group of them feeding over there on property J. So we were right to think that property J is a good place to make a contact. Also L, and then there's one over at E. But as I said, we've been doing this for a little while, and I pull up my data to match, and I find out that I've actually already made contact with 6 of the landowners on our little map. In fact, I've already contacted property J, and she's very supportive of the whole non-lead issue, and she's shooting non-lead ammunition. So maybe, since there isn't much non-lead ammunition available right now, maybe property J isn't my top priority right now. It's not to say that we shouldn't maintain these very important contacts and very important relationships, but maybe I need to look over toward property E because I haven't made contact with that landowner. So I go back to Darren and Evan and say, well, tell me more about this bird on property E. And they report and say, well, that bird died of lead poisoning. And this is where it fed in the last 3 months. So suddenly, now that we know where some of the lead exposed, birds that we know were exposed to lead, now that we know where they fed, that helps us in our priorities. So now you better believe property E is high on our list of priorities for making contact and doing outreach for non-lead. And so as an example, Evan was able to get me contact information for a landowner where a number of condors had been feeding over the last couple months. He identified this area as a potentially high-risk area. It so happened that I actually had made contact with that landowner, but not for a little while, not for a couple years. And so it's almost like that whack-a-mole, if you excuse a crude analogy, where you really have to keep on your toes and you really have to keep those relationships going. They phase in, they phase out, but you still have to maintain those relationships. And so I made a point of contacting that landowner, and I went out there to provide him with non-lead ammunition. Well, it was about an hour and a half drive. I get there early evening at the appointed time, and at the appointed place, I find that I'm greeted by 10 ranchers sitting behind desks. And my first thought was, this is an ambush. It wasn't. And really, if it was, that wouldn't be a problem, because it's all about just communicating. And we don't worry so much about what their viewpoint is, what their political views are, what their condor views are. My job is simply to provide them with non-lead ammunition and to help them follow the regulations. And so we leave it at that. Well, I met those 10 different ranchers and talked about non-lead. So this one person opened the door for communicating with others. And so this provides a little bit of hope to me, and I hope to you as well, to know that we are making contact in the landscape. We have fewer and fewer holes where we don't have non-lead ammunition outreach. Those holes, I think, will continue to be addressed as we move forward. This is an issue that I think we can solve with time. I don't like where we are now, to be honest. The number of deaths so far this year is no better than it was last year. Up until 2019, we were feeling pretty good. We were seeing a mortality rate that was pretty close to the fledgling rate. And at that point, we're starting to talk about schedules for self-sustainability. Can we reach our goal of a self-sustainable population soon? We're doing so well, productivity is ramping up. But in the last 2.5 years, we've taken a step back in terms of lead exposure. And this focused, data-driven approach is what we're doing now to try to help that situation. We will reach an endpoint, but how long it takes to get there, I'm not sure. But this is something that I think we're progressing well with. I'm going to pause here. I haven't been able to look at the chat to see if there are any basic questions, but I will pull up one. Maybe I can get Kelly and Darren, if there are any questions that have come across, they can relay them to me. But in the meantime, Catherine from Mountain View, California, is very interested in this whole non-lead outreach situation. And she asks, would a signage campaign aimed at hunters be helpful? And my answer to that is that any communication with hunters can be very positive if the messaging is supportive. And by messaging, I'd like to say that we believe that hunters and ranchers are the solution to condor recovery. They're not the problem. They're put in a situation right now where they're having difficulty adjusting and complying with the regulations that have just phased in. They need some time for this switch. They need to overcome some of the obstacles that are presented to them. And so I think outreach is positive as long as that messaging embraces the hunting and ranching community as partners in condor recovery. And so a signage campaign, I think, can be quite good, but the messaging, I think, really needs to connect with hunters and help them to make the changes that we're asking them to make.
Hey, Mike, this is Kelly. I just want to chime in here. We have a question from Scott Scheid, wondering about, our relationships with gun shops and, what kind of communication we've had with them. And he suggests mailing them a flyer to get the word out. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, that's a very good question and comment. I think it is very important to keep communicating with the store owners and with manufacturers. I visit some stores. There are staff with Institute for Wildlife Studies that do even more visiting with the store owners and communicating with manufacturers in that regard. And all of that is very positive. I made a tour not too long ago of shops just to check and see if non-lead 22 was available. And at the time, I was finding it in about half of the stores. And I've told the store owners about our program, and that communication, I think, has been very positive. The store owners understand the rules, and they are in front of the transition to copper ammunition. They know the law, and they are recommending non-lead products for their hunting clients. I will mention some of the communication as a vendor that I've had with online retailers. And one retailer in particular knows about our program and likes our program so much that she actually calls me when something good comes in her shop. She's based in Montana, and she'll call me, and it's almost once a week where she'll give me a call and she'll say, "Hey, Mike, I got a case of 6.5 Creedmoor non-lead, and would you like to have it? I wanted to give you first crack before I throw it online to the vultures online." And so I really appreciate that she has helped me maintain a good stock of non-lead ammunition, probably the best stock of non-lead ammunition of any vendor in the state of California, and probably in the country.
Mike, I'm going to jump in and ask a question, because I think it kind of ties to what a lot of the folks here are thinking about. And that's, we've been doing this non-lead ammunition giveaway program since 2012, and you've been involved in that from the very beginning. Why don't you comment on just how different the market is now compared to any other period of time? I mean, you use the word unprecedented, and I agree with that. But how different is it now compared to the past? And do you feel hopeful that the market is going to turn around sooner than later?
Yes, that timeline is really interesting. We started in 2012 with a rather large grant, and we advertised. We weren't sure what to expect, and we advertised our program, and I believe in the first 48 hours, we had received about 500 applications for non-lead ammunition. So right then and there, we realized, okay, the demand is high. People want ammunition. People are willing to ask us for it. And at the time, we were working with Cabela's. Cabela's gave us a nice discount, and getting the ammunition was as simple as sending a spreadsheet to Cabela's with everyone's contact information. Cabela's filled all the orders, shipped the ammunition directly to the recipients. And so for the first couple of years working with Cabela's, the availability of non-lead ammunition was fairly strong, enough to where we can usually find what we want in stock at Cabela's without having to do much shopping. And it was a very easy transition to get that product to the hunters. In recent years, we've seen a shift in availability and a shift in the regulations. The Safety for All Act was fully implemented in 2019. And this incidentally coincides with the spike that we're seeing with condor mortality. But the Safety for All Act designed for safety. And I applaud that. And I hope that that law is bringing us a step closer to protecting our children and ourselves from gun violence. But at the same time, it's introduced a lot of regulations that's made purchasing ammunition more difficult. It's instituted eligibility checks, which are commonly referred to now as background checks. And so the hunter has to go through this process to get approval from Department of Justice before they can purchase ammunition. Department of Justice charges a fee for this service. And then the ammunition has to be delivered face to face. And so our program has changed in the sense that to follow these regulations, we needed to become an ammunition vendor, which is what we did. And now we no longer ship the ammunition directly to their homes. We deliver it face to face. And in fact, yesterday, was it yesterday? It was yesterday. Yesterday, I was delivering ammunition in Ventura, California. So that gives you an idea of how far and wide we go to meet with hunters and ranchers. And so this has made us a little less efficient in terms of the number of people served, but at the same time, it's given us an excuse for meeting hunters and ranchers face to face. And that has only been positive. We like the greater interaction with the hunters and ranchers. And but lately, since the COVID situation, we are seeing the availability of ammunition just plummet. And in the last 6 months, as I mentioned, it's recovering slowly, but we're still not seeing non-lead versions of the 22 and 17, which are the most common calibers for shooting ground squirrels. And so ranchers who are looking to control ground squirrels right now are finding it next to impossible to get non-lead ammunition. We have it. And so that's why we need to focus our distribution on those hunters and ranchers who can make the most difference for the condors.
So Mike, I think we're probably getting close to wanting to wrap up with the last remaining questions, but it occurred to me it's a good aha moment here for all of you that have sat through and watched this hour-long Zoom chat. You've heard a very complicated conservation story, if you will. And, you know, it just goes to show that life is rarely so simple. You know, it's not just a ban that fixes it, or it's not just this or that you really need to get into the weeds and look at the detail and find out what's going on. Some of the questions that are being asked here are things like, you know, how does the lead incident rate compare, you know, in Central California compared to other locations? And, you know, that fluctuates greatly, probably due to availability and other factors. But I can tell you species-wide, wherever they are, lead poisoning attributes roughly 50% of the known mortality, whether that's Arizona or California. It's very high. It's the number one contributing factor, or limiting factor to recovery, no matter where condors are. Beyond that, I don't know if we're prepared at this point to give any more of a detailed answer. And just real quickly, I want to see if there's any other answers or questions that we can direct to Mike here.
Can I address a couple of points?
Yeah, please.
Scott asks if the number of wild-born condors in a year has been greater in some years than the number of deaths. And yes, that has been true, or at least very close. Before 2019, we were seeing very similar death and birth rates in the wild. And so that's very encouraging. We have had years that are better than this. And so I do believe we will get back to that point where we're really minimizing the amount of mortality. There was a question about other states and why shouldn't just lead be banned in California. And I think this is just a process. California is the first state to require the use of non-lead ammunition for wildlife. And so it is a little bit of a not really a test case, but sort of a front runner in terms of that process. We've gotten the lead out of gasoline, lead out of paint. There is a North American non-lead coalition that is really working in other states to promote non-lead ammunition. And so there is a process, not just in California, for moving away from lead ammunition entirely. Will we reach a point where we're only dealing with non-lead? Well, I think that's a future consideration. And so that process, I think, is happening towards a non-lead culture. George asks about out-of-state purchases. Ammunition is hard to get anywhere, no matter what state you're in. The shelves are empty or very close to empty. So if you can find ammunition out of state, you're not supposed to bring it into California. The law requires you to transfer it first to an ammunition vendor before you bring it into the state. And so they're bringing it into the state is not really something that's supposed to be done.
Well, it seems like we've answered all your questions and we're almost at 5 o'clock. So allow me to just wrap it up and say thank you for attending and learning with us the nuances of this very complicated but worthwhile endeavor. And after 25 years of working toward Condor recovery, not only do we feel like we're on the right track, but we also feel that it is possible. It's hard sometimes to stay optimistic when we're dealing with such high lead incidents at this time. But I think we have a pretty good understanding as to why, and it doesn't seem like this is a long-term situation. So, we're going to keep at what we're doing and being strategic and helping hunters and ranchers to switch to copper ammunition and other non-lead alternatives. And we're going to release as many condors as we can. And that's what we can do. And it will work eventually. It's just going to take more time. And we just want to thank you all once again for your support. And hopefully you'll join us next month. Again, that's July 29, the last Thursday of the month, for the next installment of our Condor Zoom chats. So thank you.